just wanted to start, Alex, by like having you possibly explain to everybody what the PCT is if they're unfamiliar.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me on, Sam. Just giving me your platform to speak about my experience. I really think that this mode is good for just being able to break down a lot of the details of what through hiking and long distance hiking looks like for people that aren't familiar with that whole world. So yeah, the Pacific Crest Trail is one of the three main long distance hiking trails in America. So you have the Pacific Crest Trail from west to east. You have the Continental Divide Trail, which roughly also goes from Mexico to Canada through the states of North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Colorado, New Mexico. I don't know all of them, but goes through more of the midsection of the western half of the country. And then one that I think is probably the most popular, the Appalachian Trail,
I've
more
heard of
like
that.
through the East Coast, the Midwest of the country a little bit. So yeah, the Pacific Crest Trail is the western big three of the trails, and it is currently, it kind of changes from season to season depending on how many miles are open every year. But this year it was 2,650 miles, and yeah,
Wow.
most people hike either northbound or southbound. And yeah, this trail crosses California, Oregon, and Washington, and ends and begins either at the southern border in Mexico or at the northern border with Canada.
Understood. Understood. So where do I even begin? So you had to, I would assume you had to time that with the seasons to make sure that things were going to be, you know, not too dreary, or
Yeah,
that you
yeah,
didn't run
totally.
into anything too extreme, because it's already extreme enough of a task as it is. So did you go in the spring?
Yeah, so the Pacific Crest Trail season, the seasons are different from whether either you're going to walk northbound or southbound. I was a northbound hiker last year in 2022 when I set out on my walk. And so the northbound season is generally considered to begin at the earliest in March and latest in May. Um, Early seasons start in the March, is usually filled with a little bit more of rain, potentially snow. And in May, the key component of the season is the heat and how much access you have to water and how dry it is in the first section of the trail, which is the desert.
Understood. So if I could back up just a minute to this point where you find out what the PCT is and you have the nerve to say, like, I want to go do that.
Yeah, yeah.
What, how did you find out about it, and what like drew you to it?
Yeah, so um, I've always kind of just grown up being outdoors, being influenced by my two grandpas, actually really just influencing me to get outside and yeah, just have that appreciation for nature. But for me, I first learned about the Pacific Crest Trail in 2017 after one of my close friends hiked that year, and he and I met back. I was still in school at the time, and so we kind of rejoined there, and he shared with me his story of his hike that summer. I'd known that he was going on that hike before he set off in 2017, and then yeah, so when I saw him at the end of his hike later in the year in 2017, I just got the chance to sit down and ask him how it was, and ever since I had that conversation with him, I was like, that's something that I'm gonna have to do at some point.
Yeah, so it wasn't just a shot in the dark. You met somebody who had done it and sort of got to dip your toe in the water of what that might look like. Um, what was his experience? Was it positive?
Yeah, definitely. He had really, for me, it was inspiring experience. Really, just the way that he shared his experience with me. He's definitely a lot more outdoorsy, I guess could be the word. He had a lot more experience backpacking. He has a lot of experience with winter sports, and um, for me, it kind of was maybe more of a shot in the dark. I didn't not have any prior backpacking experience before I set out on my hike. Everything that I knew as far as like wilderness preparedness and survival was very basic, and more so for me, the firsthand experience that I had learning through a friend was all I needed to, feel comfortable enough to decide to take the walk.
Yeah, because I know when people hear that and they go like, okay, this person just like decided to hike 2,600 miles, I mean, did you have to take time off of work to do that?
Yeah, so
Did you work remotely?
no, I did not work. Most people either give up their jobs or if they can take sabbatical. I had already been traveling for probably about a year and was just living off of my savings. I had set aside, my what I had estimated or researched the amount of money that I needed and put that away for the hike. And so I was kind of already on the road before I decided to go on the hike. And I did train lightly for the couple months leading up to the hike when the season was beginning.
And was that like working out, running, ruck hiking?
Yeah, so I mean, I think to go back to your previous question, like there's a lot of surveys that go on for the trail, but there's one specific survey that this guy has been doing for the last 10 years. His name is Mac, and his platform is Halfway Anywhere. And I think this year's survey that there was, I believe, 30 to 40% of people had no prior backpacking experience before, going on their first through hike, which is actually is more common than you would expect. So I was part of that group of people. As far as training, I think really the best tip is just to load up your backpack and go for a day hike or go for an overnighter. I at that time would just go out day hike in the park, and I live in North County, San Diego, and my local park is the longest loop is 10 miles, and I mean most days I would just hike between 5 to 10 miles with my backpack and load it up to maybe 20 to 25 pounds, and that's really all I did. I'm not a big runner, so I didn't run, but that is popular. I mean, I think some people cycle, some people lift weights, maybe swimming. I mean, there's a general consensus of any sort of strengthening to your body that would be applicable for hiking, that people do. But yeah, I think really the big one is just go out there with your backpack, because that's what you're basically getting into for 3 to 6 plus months when you're out on the trail.
That's what I was going to ask next. So it took you about 6 months?
Yeah, so the Pacific Crest Trail Association is the organization that will issue you a permit. And so for a northbound hiker, my permit date was in mid-April, which is one of the most popular times to begin.
Okay.
So I began April 14th and I stopped September 15th. So I was out there for about 150 days was my hike.
150 days.
Yeah. Just hit that 5-month mark.
And so I'm so bad at quick arithmetic. 2,600
No
miles,
worries.
150 days. What does that break down? I don't
think I could look up the stats for you specifically.
But
I'm
on
not sure what
average,
the average, I guess, so I ended up hiking a total of trail miles and another category of miles that I would walk off trail to town and back and forth. All in all, I walked 2,500 miles, so I actually didn't make it to the end. But I think I roughly averaged from my logbook, I think it was 16 or 17 miles per day. And then also, I mean, you can get into it if you want to break it down by how many days you just walked, or with what we would call a zero, which is your day off where you walk 0 miles.
Understood. Okay, so take me down to the southern border of Mexico, right? California-Mexico border right there. So where does the trail start? What does the trail look like? And sort
Yeah.
of what's going through your head at that point?
Yeah, so the beginning of the Pacific Crest Trail on the southern border is in Campo, California. It's about roughly a 3-hour drive east of downtown San Diego.
Okay.
And yeah, Campo is just a super small, unincorporated community. There's really not that much out there. And the southern terminus of the trail is probably about 40 or 50 yards from the border wall, right on the border there with Mexico.
Right there, you see
And
it.
yeah, like you're looking at the border wall. You're as far south and
That you can
that you can
possibly
be
go.
at. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And yeah, so for me, starting in mid-April, like this year was one of the best and most fortunate weather years that we had within the last 5 years that I've known of the Pacific Crest Trail. So yeah, the first section of the trail is about 700 miles long, which is the first of 5, which is called the desert. And yeah, so April 14th, I had my parents and my sister drive me down to the southern terminus, and yeah, it was a perfect day. Honestly, couldn't ask for anything better. And
What did you have like on your back? Like, you just had your backpack, like, uh, clothes. What kind of
yeah,
things? Yeah, what kind of things did you need to keep on you at all times?
yeah. So one thing that's really big in the through hiking community is efficiency of your gear and how much you weigh, because that if you're carrying more weight than you need to, you're really going to um, make it a little bit harder on yourself. So I
Yeah.
was always in the mindset of being as light as possible and as efficient as possible with all my gear. And then there's another subgroup of people in the through hiking community or long distance community called ultralights, which is really focuses on minimalism and going as light as possible. So when I started, something that people speak a lot about are their base weights. And so for me, my total base weight was, I think, about 18 pounds, which I would say is slightly above the average, if maybe 15 or 16 pounds is the average base weight for somebody that's starting.
Yeah, that's light. I would expect it to be heavier.
Yeah, no, I mean, compared to somebody who, is maybe a weekend backpacker or, maybe a John Muir hiker, maybe a few 100 miles long trail once a year, a couple times a year, where you can get away with carrying probably a 20 plus pound pack. When it comes to through hiking, most people are in the average of about 15 pounds. And then if you're into ultralight, I mean, some of those people have base weights that are less than 10 pounds. So yeah, I mean, it's you can get pretty light.
What are you carrying? Like,
So
is it just 10 pounds?
yeah, I mean, so at the ultralight range, I mean, you're really not carrying anything that you don't need.
Because you're not
Total
carrying much
bare
more.
bones. Yeah, you're not carrying a lot when it comes to 10 pounds. As far as somebody like myself who is a first-time through hiker, inexperienced, and basically all I could do was gather firsthand experience from my friends and research off the internet. I did my best to find things that were light and of good quality that would also last me the whole trail without having to replace my gear. So just as a rundown for what I had in my bag that I can remember off the top of my head, of course, first, how the breakdown really goes is the big 3, which is your backpack and your sleep system and your shelter. I started with a tent that weighed probably about 2.5 pounds. My backpack weighed about 2 pounds, and my sleep system weighed about 2 pounds. And then beyond that, I think what I started with was a puffy jacket, a rain jacket, a pair of rain pants, a change of clothes to sleep in. I started with a DLSR camera, so that right there was like 2 pounds, plus like the charger and some of the spare equipment that I had for that. I also had some other electronics like charging my phone, my GPS, like maybe 2 or 3 charging cables, and then my non-consumables, which would be your water and your food. At that point too, a couple extra pounds when you add that in. So
Interesting. Okay, you mentioned you had a camera on you.
I did, yeah.
Shout out SPJ. But yeah, I would imagine you got some amazing photos out there.
Yeah, so funny enough, I did start with a Sony A7C that I had been shooting on for about a year. And I really liked taking that just because of how lightweight and compact it was.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, for the trail, I just got the new iPhone, and I think after like 4 days, I was over the camera just because of how much it weighed and how clunky it was on my shoulder strap. And I just realized that the iPhone was good enough to get me by for the whole hike. So the camera I dropped, I think, after the first week, or maybe it was the second week. Yeah, so the camera was short-lived.
Yeah, I understood.
Yeah.
But I would imagine, you still on your iPhone got an extreme reel.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is an abundance of natural beauty to have been seen.
Yeah.
I think that one of the most special things about the Pacific Crest Trail is just the diversity in biomes that you walk through. So you really do get a beautiful perspective of what it's like to be in a desert. And, when you say desert, I think a stereotypical desert is, sand dunes and
Super
stuff
barren.
like that. But yeah, I mean, the kind of desert that we have here in Southern California is not really like that. So it is mountainous, and the trail itself does cross many mountain ranges. So yeah, from whether it's being in the desert to being in the Sierra Nevada, where that portion of the trail, the second section, is roughly about 300 miles. You spend most of the time above 10,000 feet. So, I mean,
Okay.
you are in some pretty serious mountain ranges.
Serious altitude.
Yeah, you're
So
definitely up
are you
there.
keeping your food? How are you getting your food?
Yeah, so food, it's fully dependent on how long the carry is. Any of the carries could be, and of course this is dependent upon how fast you want to walk, how fast you can walk, depending on what kind of terrain you're going through, what the weather conditions are. Any of the carries could be between 3 to 7 or 8 days, I would say, on average.
So a carry is going from town to town?
Right, yeah, this is
Okay.
the amount of miles that, you're walking between town. And yeah, so as far as food goes, I personally carried an OPSAC. It's like a animal odor proof kind of big Ziploc bag, basically. Like I
Got
think
it.
it's probably a couple liters. Like it's a decent sized bag, and yeah, so you carry enough food to get you through to the next town, and yeah, I think you want to be pretty mindful of how heavy your food is. So yeah, just trying to stick to stuff that is calorically dense and light as possible is the name of the game for most people. So yeah, I think it's really can come down to how much money you want to spend on food as well. You can either go the dirtbag route and just be eating ramen and instant potatoes all day long, 2 times, 3 times a day,
Yeah.
to being a little bit more bougie with it and buying freeze-dried meals, buying lots of nuts and dried fruits and stuff that is going to cost you a bit more money, maybe a little heavier, but at least you'll be getting some decent nutrition while you're out there.
Right on. Yeah, I'd probably just be living off coffee, oatmeal, and berries.
Dude, yeah,
Day.
there's a lot of people out there that are doing that.
Yeah,
for sure.
I lean toward minimalism when I can. So you get out there, yeah, and the landscape starts changing. At first it's desert. How long does it take you to get out of the desert, and what do you see while you're in the desert portion kind of the trail?
Yeah, totally. So I think from here on out it would be good to just let you know that my hike was about as average as it gets in terms of length covered, distance wise. So the first section, the desert, 700 miles, it begins at the southern terminus in Campo, California, and it ends in Kennedy Meadows South, which is just north of Tehachapi, California.
Okay.
I think I can actually look this up. The first section of the trail I was able to complete in about 35 days, I believe. Let's take a look.
And while you're out there, sort of...
45 days is how long it took me for the first section.
Okay. So what are you seeing while you're out there? What kinds of wildlife? What kinds of flora?
Yeah, the first section of the trail is beautiful. It's more of a high arid desert, and you are, crossing mountains through this section. Um, it mostly is a lot of shrubbery. There's not a lot of trees out there. It's a pretty exposed section. It's known for being hot. It's known for being dry. If there's not a lot of rainfall, collecting water throughout the season is something that becomes more and more difficult. Um, the first big mountain of the desert is Mount San Jacinto. Um, and depending on the time of the season there, you could get snow, you could get rain. It's all varied depending on what the weather conditions call for.
Right.
And through that section, like past San Jacinto, you don't go over San Gregorio, but you go right by it. You do pass Mount Baldy. And as you move through the section, I think it's mostly pretty consistent as far as the flora and fauna go. As far as animals go, I think what is most common is, anything from your small birds to birds of prey.
Got it.
Mountain lions are something, that everybody's kind of on the lookout for. Some
Right.
people might see, some people might not.
Did you see anything like that while you were out there? Like,
So I only had one big animal encounter. You don't really see or get to the bears until you get into the second section, and then you might as well also, every once in a while, there was people that ran into bears in Oregon and Washington as well. But my only real big encounter with an animal was a mountain lion at night. It was the first night that I slept alone. I was waiting for somebody's, didn't end up meeting up with them, and I didn't feel like going any further. Ate dinner, set up camp, and at like 2:30 in the morning, I woke up and just heard these like mountain lion cries. They sounded electric almost, and I just instantly like woke up to adrenaline because I knew it was close, but I had camped with my head up against the edge of the brush, and I was camping in a more like forested area. And within about 4 minutes, I had like put my headlamp on, packed all my things into my bag, and just got up and walked out of that place. And then I probably walked a few minutes down to where some other people were camping. And yeah, so I technically only slept half the night alone. But I didn't really have any big animal encounters like some other people that I heard on trail
no,
did.
but that is terrifying.
Yeah, for sure.
That has got to be terrifying.
I mean, you're sleeping outside. At this point, too, I had dropped my tent after the second week. So I think I spent about 60% of my nights just cowboy camping, which means
Okay.
sleeping shelterless.
Yeah.
So at this point, like I was cowboy camping, and yeah, pitch black, dark outside. Nobody's around in that site that I was at, and mountain lion cries right behind your head at night.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah.
I would have froze. I don't think I would have moved. I think I probably would have tried to just stay in the dark and just stay as tucked up as I possibly could.
Mountain lion bait. Dude, yeah, I mean,
and just not make a peep.
You got two decisions to make. I think for me, just like the mountain lion, I think maybe from what I can remember in my mind, the first minute was like where the cat was crying, and I was like, oh man, like I'm not just gonna sit here and play dead, like I'm gonna move from here now. And so that was the decision that was made.
Oh my gosh,
yeah,
dude. Ugh. So that's in the desert? Where are you when that happened?
So that section, I do remember it pretty well. I was hiking with a cool group of friends at that point. That day I had passed mile 500, which is close to one of the popular stops in that section, which is called Hikertown.
Okay.
And there's a really beautiful portion. I can't remember the name of the land through there. It had been hit by a wildfire a couple of years prior, and it's just this really beautiful section of the mountain, the forest that is growing back from that devastation of the fire, and you kind of walking out of the mountain down to really like what is the ground there. There's near Mojave, there's a lot of wind farms down there. So once you walk off of the mountain there's just a section of trail that you're just walking at, the bottom. I don't know what the elevation there for being at sea level or not is, but you're out of the mountains basically for that section, walking
Understood.
between the mountains.
Understood. So you start to move out of the lowlands into the highlands in central to northern California?
Yeah, so that portion of the trail, that like the Southern
Shasta,
California,
all that.
Southern California section moving into Central California is mostly the Pacific Crest Trail does end up joining the John Muir Trail
Right.
for I think about 150 miles approximately. I'm not sure. So yeah, you that portion, Central California, you're walking through Yosemite, through Kings Canyon, through Sequoia, and once you end up at that section, you get to the end of the Sierra, which is the second section at Kennedy Meadows North.
Yeah.
And from there, you do start walking north towards Shasta,
Right.
towards some of the other towns, Belton, Dunsmuir,
Is that the most
Etna.
is that one of the most, or the most like beautiful portion of the trail, or was it, do you not really look at it like that?
No,
Did it all have its own flavor and variety to it?
Yeah,
or
for sure. I
was
think
there a portion that you said, this is so breathtaking that this is sort of like why I did this?
Yeah, totally. I think that there are sections that inspire everybody differently. I think for me, like I enjoyed every single section. There is what's known as the Norcal Blues. It's the third section, Northern California. When you get out of the Sierra, there's a lot of people that don't particularly like that section because of how the terrain changes just from being in the Sierra, and it just, I think for me the Sierra and Washington were my favorite sections, just being in the mountains and just truly being, you know, nowhere, really, just being in the wilderness and those backcountry areas that are, not touched by humans beyond this little trail that, goes through those parts. Also, Oregon is a section that's kind of known for not being as stimulating. I really enjoyed that portion of the trail. But yeah, I think in general, I didn't really ever have any part that I, would say wasn't as enjoyable as another, and they all have their own distinctions about them.
Yeah, I remember you sending me a couple pictures back when you were in, I think it might have been Lake Shasta. You were going across this ridge. If you're willing to share, we'll maybe we'll show them on screen.
Totally, yeah.
And it was like something I'd seen, like it just looked like something out of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It was just this like snow scattered across this ridge with like a little crater lake kind of in the center, and just clouds and stuff out in the distance. I'm like,
dude, yeah.
How
It's
do you
majestic,
serve this right now?
For sure. Yeah, dude, totally. There's so many parts of that trail. I mean, yeah, where I felt like I was in Middle Earth, and there's the grandness of the mountains, of the spaces that you walk between, walking from the north and the south side of a mountain, up and over and down, and then you see the next mountain in front of you, and, it could be a couple hours away, it could be a few days away. I mean, it is really, the sense of grandeur that you have when you get out there is unlike anything I've ever experienced elsewhere. And I think since you are walking as compared to any other mode of travel, it's, you're working for it, you're earning it. And I think that pretty much the whole time as I was out there, I think that I really was able to live within that space of majesty that the trail and these other long distance trails provide for people.
Definitely. So when you're out on this trail, you embarked up by yourself, correct?
Yes, I did start alone. It's something that's pretty normal.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, though, that there's so many people that you meet while you're out here on this trail. So
Yeah.
I would imagine that sometimes that could be like a saving grace, maybe when you need companionship and
Sure,
company,
yeah,
but at the
totally.
same time could also be sort of maybe nerve wracking because you don't maybe necessarily know any of these people and you're kind of a lone soldier and you maybe did you ever feel what was that experience like for you?
Yeah,
Or
totally.
did you ever have anything where you felt sort of like vulnerable or at risk, or did you meet mostly really good people?
Sure, yeah. So I think I probably break your question down into three parts. The first section, or the first part of the question is so regarding the amount of people on trail. So as a northbound hiker, being that the season is from March to the end of May, the PCTA will issue 50 permits a day. And that's kind of how the association manages the foot traffic on trail just so that it isn't damaged from overuse.
There you
And
go.
so, you think about it's a few thousand people that start in that window of time at the beginning of the season. And as I had mentioned to you, I started in April, which is right in between those, the start of the season. So, really, what a lot of people consider, that start as being in the bubble. And so
Mm.
when I started, there was people all around. I mean, I when I started, I mean, I met somebody within the first 5 minutes. Like it's not really like I think at the beginning what most people think, especially on a northbound hike where you're just like all alone and there's nobody to be seen.
Yeah.
The northbound hike is definitely more of a social and community experience as opposed to what a southbound hike would be, where you don't see as many people just because a southbound hike is a little bit more of a um, experience of solace, I would say.
Solitude. Yeah.
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 So for me, I knew that hiking the Pacific Crest Trail was something that I wanted to do to be a part of the community, which was also another part of why I had waited from hiking the COVID year, which was 2020, because as apart from all 50 states being represented mostly every single year, there's a large community of international hikers from all over the world that show up to hike these American trails. And so I think just being able to be a part of that international community and group of people was something that not only for me affected me in a positive way mentally, but also just the camaraderie of being able to share the trail with people, that I don't necessarily have the, fortune of being able to interact with on my day-to-day life just made my time on trail more interesting and fun.
Yeah. I just imagine you coming to like a campsite or something, and there's just this free spirited roaming group of just like gypsies who just are dancing around a fire, but it's obviously not like that.
Yeah,
That's just
no, I
my
mean, I
imagination
think
running
that
wild.
no,
you
I
know
think that the kinds of people that you're running into on trail are of a very adventurous and free spirit. It's kind of an experience that you really like. You sort of know what you're getting into until you get there, and then it really is just kind of like a singular experience, at least as somebody who's a first time through hiker. Um, yeah, I mean, I think from day to day, like you would see the most amount of people either on like a lunch break or at the end of the day, especially at the beginning as a northbounder who started in the bubble
right.
in mid-April. There, I was with a lot of people. Like I would pass, or people would pass me daily for, maybe the first 2 or 3 months until I started getting closer to Oregon and Washington. And then by the time I had gone to Oregon and Washington, I wasn't hiking in a group with multiple people. I had found one buddy that I hiked with for like the last 3 months roughly. And when we hiked Oregon and Washington together, that was definitely more of a experience of solitude where we would pass maybe some days max of two other people within the whole day. We'd hike maybe 10 to 12 hours a day. We only see two other people out there for the day. So there's definitely a give and take of, what kind of person you are, whether you want to be around a lot of people or not. And it is also easy to find crowds of people on trail, or also just what they would refer to as hike your own hike, and just hike beyond the bubble of people, and find that place of solitude that a lot of people are seeking when they go out on through hikes.
Were you doing any kind of journaling while you were out there, or any kind of, recording to sort of process what you were experiencing and self-reflect during the process? Or was it more of a meditation where you were kind of just like almost finding a train of thought that worked for you?
Yeah, totally. I think the experience for me was a little bit of a combination of both. I didn't start journaling until my second month. I started journaling digitally. I did have a miles log, so that was the one thing that I did do every single day just to track my miles. Um, so then the last 4 months, I did do a digital journal. But yeah, I mean, people go out there for so many different reasons. I mean, there's people that would carry pen and paper, pen and pencils, watercolors.
I would
Like, you know,
imagine
it's
so,
like
yeah.
whatever you like to do. It's another space where you can practice and express your creativity and be free.
And come back with some
Um,
art.
yeah, yeah, totally. I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of people are carrying cameras, so photo and video is really big.
I'm so excited to see what you got.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then as far as like, for me, the hike being a meditation, it definitely was a walking meditation. I would notice, especially after the first month, which for me was my learning curve, being that I had no idea, like beyond the very basics of, how to survive. I was learning how to, um, set up a space camp, to just learning how to live on trail. So for me, after the first month and just going, catching up to that learning curve where I was comfortable, the trail really turned into a walking meditation for me, where within the first hour of the day after waking up and getting some breakfast, I could find this flow state. And some days, like if I wasn't getting distracted or there wasn't much to see, like I could just be in this flow state for several hours walking. And some days it was a flow state of, not being anywhere in my mind at all and just being free and silent and still. And then others to where, my flow state mentally was just creative and I could think a lot about either reflecting on my life or, creative endeavor, whatever it might have been.
Did you make any major impactful decisions, or did you have any revelations about your own life while you were out there, or anything that was, you feel, I don't know, shifted you in a positive way?
Yeah, I think that before I hiked, that I think if people who really find an interest or have the idea that they want to go through hike, you hear these stories about how a through hike has profoundly changed people's lives. And while that story is true, it wasn't quite really my reality. I think that for me, I knew that trail was a place where I could be free, in a undefined space, more to speak, and kind of stepping out of the traditional cube or block of society.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
I know a lot of people are seeking that now.
yeah,
They
for
want to
sure.
find a way to get away from their desk, but it's scary.
Yeah, totally.
It's like one of those things that they feel chained to, but it's also like their security.
Yeah, stability. Yeah, totally. Because when you go out on trail, I mean, you're leaving that all behind. And I mean, really, your only goal every day is to either walk north or walk south. And yeah, I mean, there is something very freeing about that. In my experience, the trail was mostly just a set of reminder, of certain wisdoms. And um, while the trail was life changing for me, I feel like I came out on the other end just really with the sense of knowing myself better. Um, and also, I think there's a large people of or group of people that can connect to um, nature through spirituality as well. That I had multiple conversations with people about, why they're there, why they're out there, and what nature means to them. And also just reminding yourself that, we all inherently have this connection to nature that, as we go through society and grow up and become conditioned, we are further removed from. So I think that one for me too was something, when I was working the 9 to 5, I was commuting to work every day, just the regular old story that we all live in American society and all around the world, was a way, one of the most, I would say, defiant ways to break out of that mold and really connect with something that is long before many of us arrived here.
Yeah. Yeah. Were there any wild moments out there? Like what was the craziest thing, the interaction? What was the craziest thing that happened out on the
Craziest
trail?
thing that happened. Well,
Or
there's
the
so many different ways I feel like the trail can be crazy.
yeah, I mean or maybe just if you have multiple moments.
Sure, yeah. Well, I think for me, when I think of the craziest moments on trail, would be the moment that I almost likely would have drowned, or there's 2 passes in particular that were kind of sketchy and technical. Um, I think I think about other people's experiences too, and about what wild may be. I mean, for somebody else, it might be that they got a hitchhike from somebody who they wouldn't have known was crazy, but that was not a safe experience. Or, I mean, it could be somebody falling from the trail, or um, yeah, an injury. I mean, there's so many different things,
Stories that
but
you would hear from people that
yeah,
you
totally.
encountered.
I think for me though, yeah, the wildest portions that really like made my blood pump and kind of get some of the adrenaline out there were some of the more technical portions of the hiking where focus was required, and a single step might either result in serious injury or your death, because there are a lot of parts out there that um, could seriously either injure you or end your life.
So, is that high altitude?
Well, I mean, it could. I mean, there have been people that have just slipped off the side of the trail. They twisted their ankle, whatever it may be. And I mean, I don't think you need to fall that far and just hit your head the wrong way. But like, I mean, it
True.
could be, yeah, it could be either you're navigating through snow at the top of a pass of a mountain, or I mean, it just could be a freak accident where you slip and you land the wrong way and you don't catch your footing. And if you're near the edge of a cliff, or a hillside or the mountainside, like it could be something like that too. Like, I think that there were many times in which I would think about how close to death I was on trail. I think from the point of I'm not sure. I think it was just really like to something to think about. And yeah, I think that there are many seemingly like safe positions that you could be in on trail that could be more dangerous than they seem.
Mm. And you might not even know as you're walking in. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you feel more confident and strong as a person? I would imagine definitely in nature you do.
Yeah, totally.
Because you can. Were there nights where you ever had to, or were there times where you ever had to forage, or you had to like sort of rely on nature to go find water certain places because you didn't necessarily like? Was there ever a moment where you ran low on resources and you
Yeah.
had to rely on the natural environment?
So beyond food, not really. I think it really just as far as like where you mentioned foraging, it's not really much of a thing beyond like getting up into like Northern California, Oregon, and Washington, where you're picking berries for fun because they're on the bushes as you walk by. As far as
That's so cool.
preparedness to food, I never seriously ran out of food. I think like my longest stint was the section that I was finishing the desert, going into Kennedy Meadows South. I had bought the wrong kind of nor pasta sides instead of the rice sides, and I couldn't eat them because you can't boil them as fast. So I went 3 nights without dinner, but there's nothing really where, is you make sure that you get enough food to get to the next town, right? There really isn't a lot of food to forage. I think through like past the Sierras, there is a small group of people who do like to fish for trout and cook, and that's a nice experience. But I think it takes too much time if you're through hiking to stop to fish every single day. But where rationing does come into and can be a life or death situation is when it comes to water. Um, the most difficult section, or the one that everybody's the most conscious of, is the deserts. But after that, I mean, just to give you an idea, as far as water rationing goes in the desert, it's recommended that you carry 1 liter of water per about 5 miles. My water rationing was a little bit above the average because I felt that I had a higher heat resistance than some of the other people that I was walking with. So I would usually ration 1 liter of water for maybe about 7 miles. I mean, some days it could have been for 10 miles, and everybody's body is different, right? But I think really the key thing is, when it comes to water, obviously, is being hydrated.
Right.
So the first section, your water capacity is going to be anywhere between, I don't know, depending on the carry, 3 to 6 liters. And then after that, water is not so hard to find in the Sierra. It can get a little dicey in Northern California.
You need one of those filters, don't you?
Yeah, so most people do carry a form of water filtration. Most people just carry filters. Some people like aqua tabs or salt tabs or iodine tabs and stuff like that.
Right.
Just comes down to personal preference. But yeah, once you get into Oregon and Washington, the water is pretty bountiful, so it's not as a key or crucial component to your everyday as it is in some of the drier sections.
So take me through this time really quick where you said you almost drowned out on the trail.
Yeah, so I just it would have turned into just being a freak accident, really. There was a section, it was my second to last day before crossing the northern boundary of Yosemite, which is in the it's in the last section of the Sierra, within the last 80 miles. I think the river there is, I don't want to guess, I think it's the Tyndall River, but I can't remember exactly. It's by a section there called Wilma Lake, and yeah, we were crossing this river. Me and my buddy Lucas were crossing the river, and there's one of the hazards of the trail is river fording. There have been, there are deaths where people, can't get past the river, they drown.
Right.
Or they fall in. And this was definitely one of the biggest river crossings of my hike. My hike was it was an easy year for fording just because the snow levels in the Sierra were a bit lower than average. So the water
that comes down.
Right. Yeah. So the rivers weren't too swollen, but this was one of the largest river crossings I had, where we jumped across a couple boulders, and there's some pretty good leaps, and yeah, this one was just could have been the freak accident. I was at the edge of the river, and I had a pine cone stuck in the tread of my shoe, like right underneath the ball of my foot, and I jumped off on my right foot and landed on the boulder with my left foot first, and because I landed, my foot slipped out because of the pine cone. And I luckily was able to catch myself and balance on this boulder in the river. And yeah.
Was it like rushing by?
Yeah, this one was definitely rushing really, really heavy. I couldn't really quite tell how deep it was, but just based on the size of the boulders, I could tell that it was, decently deep, or had probably some cracks or crevices where, you could see the water like stop and then come back over itself. Yeah. And then at the same time, like, somebody was getting rescued. I had pushed the SOS, and this helicopter was trying to land. So, I mean, there was not only, like, the river rushing, but, like, I don't know, it was fun seeing the helicopter, So,
sure, yeah. Probably somebody else doing the same thing.
I guess from what we heard that there was somebody out there that kind of had like some sort of fatigue injury or something and called the chopper out. But yeah, like in my situation that day, like I didn't realize that there was a pine cone stuck in my shoe, but
Wow.
and then when it came to the moments in which it, I was aware, like I was like, oh man, I almost fell into the river, and yeah, that
Almost just got
could have,
carted off
yeah, that could have been the day.
in
So
some stage 5
thankfully it
rapids.
wasn't. Yeah,
Jeez.
yeah,
Yeah, that's intense.
yeah,
Um,
definitely. I think your level of situational awareness is pretty high, but even sometimes, like there are things that we don't account for, and it could be the smallest thing.
so this guy that you met and you hiked the last 3 months with, are you guys still in touch? You keep in touch and
Yeah,
stuff?
definitely. I think the trail is such a it's such a quickly bonding sort of experience. Um,
Adversity.
yeah, for sure. You're
Yeah,
going through the same kinds of physical and mental challenges every day together that the a bond with somebody grows really quickly there.
for
And I
sure.
think a lot of people there are open and vulnerable to sharing their truest selves. So yeah, my buddy Lucas, he's from Switzerland, and I met him the day before I got into Mount Whitney. The first month of my hike, about maybe first month and a half, I spent hiking in groups of people, and then yeah, I think as you go, you just kind of meet your people, and yeah, then you guys can stick together if you want. That's kind of what happened in my case.
Wow. That's really cool. That's really cool. All the way from Switzerland, huh?
Yeah, like I said, there's a really big group of international hikers that come out, and that I think is from what I learned about hiking in Europe, that there isn't as much freedom to the access to trails that they have in Europe like we do in America. So these trails are, they're pretty coveted for people all around the world, just to be able to gain these freedoms that some of us here in the States have a lot easier access to.
Right, because out there, I mean, it's like you go from sea level to the Alps pretty quickly, Like
Yeah, for sure.
out here, I think it's a much more gradual
Right, we
shift.
have so much more land too than some of those countries, and what I guess we would consider like classic European countries, where um, I mean, some of them a lot of them are landlocked, so yeah, they don't get quite the same sense that they do when they come over to a trail that's like the Pacific Crest, where yeah, you just have such a large array of shifting of biomes and lands that you travel through.
Definitely. When you're out there, you have these camps, which is like town to town, right? Will your day-to-day change depending on what part of the trail you're in? And really what I'm getting at is like what does a typical day on the PCT look like?
Yeah, totally. So I think for me, it really breaks into 2 days: a normal day and a town day. So a normal day, I think as somebody who didn't plan ahead, I would make my plan, in the moment. So for me, it was, let's say I woke up, I would eat some breakfast.
How do you make your breakfast?
Yeah, so breakfast for me mostly constituted for a good while some oats, but mostly protein bars,
And you'll just have
and
like a
candy.
little you'll have like a little pocket stove or something and just
Uh,
like some water on
I
hand.
personally like to get my day started pretty quickly, so I wouldn't cook in the mornings. I would only cook for lunch and dinner. But some people do, yeah, carry their stoves.
So would you just like pour water in oats and then just like
Yeah, yeah. Most things that I was eating are really aimed to speed and ease of use.
got
So
it?
yeah, most things what we would consider as cold soaking, which is just adding water.
It's not the
So some
Ritz-Carlton people.
cold soaked oats. Yeah, then like some candy, some protein bars. I don't know. Sometimes I had some fancy stuff, some muffins or something else,
Okay.
that I found along the way. But
Got it.
yeah, so wake up, eat breakfast. Like wake up, and I would be packed. For me, I guess this is slow. Maybe it's average. I would give myself about 40 minutes to get up. I'm also not the kind of person, and I did hike with these people who would wake up and be ready in 20 minutes and start walking. Like I need a moment to wake up. Um, but yeah, be ready within about 40 minutes. Sometimes I would eat breakfast while I walk. Sometimes I'd eat when I'd pack up. And then really like how I would think about it is breaking up the day into two parts, lunch and dinner. And so the first, maybe at the beginning of the trail, maybe 3 to 4 hours. And then at the end, when I had more endurance and could walk longer, I would do it as like a 6 hour window. So if we were waking up at 6 or 7 or 8, walk until noon or 1 or 2 at the latest. And mostly try and walk at least 2.5 miles per hour. The average by the end was 3 miles per hour. And then once you get into some of those sections up in Washington, it may slow down a little bit depending on what the terrain's like. But yeah, just I guess a kind of like a leisurely in the back of my head kind of. I guess really now that I think of it though, like I wouldn't really think about it like I'm just walking 3 miles per hour, right? So kind of like estimating your mileage and where you would be or where I would be was something that kind of lost focus once I was in the rhythm of things. But yeah, like aim to walk, I don't know, maybe between.
That's brisk, by the way.
Yeah, for sure. 3 miles per hour is a little faster than average.
Yeah, like 5 miles in 40 minutes is 8 minutes a mile.
Yeah,
like,
basically.
That's a running.
Yeah, 1 hour 3 miles is kind of how it goes.
Oh yeah, that's
if you
like,
can
you're
push
moving.
3 miles per hour. But yeah, at least walk 10 to 15 miles was the goal before lunch. And then yeah, eat lunch, which was by the end like everything was super well. Like, and me and my buddy were like we were on the same schedule, so we would eat for an hour. Take our break. There would be like maybe a 5 minute water break, maybe 10 at the most. I just try to scoop water as I go to not lose time, especially towards the end of the trail.
So then you have that section in the afternoon where you're just plugging away.
Yeah, for sure. And then like the second part of the day, get some food in you and like take a quick break. An hour was what we usually allotted ourselves.
Okay.
And then it was just busting out as many miles as we could until sunset, really.
And I feel like that's the part where things could get hairy, and most people would, if there was going to be a problem, it would probably be like finding a good place to setting up, getting situated at nightfall in the middle of nowhere when you can't freak out and go to check into a hotel if you want to, like, so what was that like,
Yeah, so it's actually, I feel like it's probably a little simpler than you'd imagine, but to be respectful with L&T, which is leave no trace, every day, maybe while I was sitting at lunch, I would kind of estimate how far away I was from a specific campsite, and I used an offline map app on my phone, so I knew, I was like, I was 9 miles away or 12 miles away, or there was like 3 camp spots within 4 miles, at the end of the day. And so basically the goal was just to be able to reach one of those camp spots before sunset to just kind of chill out and have dinner and not have to sit up in the dark. But I mean, there also were days where we would push past sunset and night hike a little bit, and then just find the spot. I think it comes down to as well, like for my hike, I would break it up into the first half, which was like vacation mode, where I was still learning and having a lot of fun and not really caring about the miles. And then the second half where, the time window and the season's coming to an end. As I mentioned to you, the season at the beginning is from March to May, but for northbound hike, what you're hiking against the clock or the season is the snow and the northern Cascades of Washington. So you want to aim to get there before the snow, and what's becoming more evident year after year is also the fires. Just aiming to get to Canada from between August to beginning to mid-October. Of course, that changes every year, but for 2022, the season was over. I believe the wildfire that broke out this year that closed the trail down was in, I believe it was near the beginning of September.
Is it pretty simple to like pick a spot to get situated when you finally like want to sit down and just kind of, especially
easy
when you're cowboy camping? I mean, I would imagine you got to be a little smart about how you pick that spot, because
there's so many kinds of people that like from like a person like me who's so OCD, I will sweep away the smallest little rock to people who like just lay their stuff down and like just crash on the floor, you know.
But does it have to be? Do you want to go find high ground because you know? Do you want to like avoid water at night because that's where the animals go?
Sure, yeah.
Or is it like
I guess there is some consideration to where you want to camp depending where you are and what's going on.
right?
As far as like some places where I had to consider where I was camping, the Sierra, just depending at what elevation I was at, maybe um, like the name of the game there for me was to camp below a pass and then wake up and get to the mountain and then walk down. It could have been that like you choose to push a bit further to get down into a valley where the temperatures would be a little warmer than, up on like an exposed ridge or,
Definitely.
yeah. So there's definitely some consideration to be taken in choosing where you do camp. As far as like once you get there, I think it's really comes down to like, are there other people there? Like where can you set up? Like where can you be respectful of others? Um, and then yeah, it's just really about like throwing up your tent or your cowboy spot or getting to bed. Like, yeah.
Definitely. Definitely. So at the toward the end, I would say probably that last third of the trail, you're in a flow. All the friend groups have sort of, like it's just you and what was his name? Lucas. And you're in Oregon heading into Washington toward Canada. What is that section of the trail looks like? Like what is that section of the trail sort of, what was your experience there?
Yeah. So I'll kind of have to take it a step back because our hike, we ended up doing a lot of flip-flopping, which is basically skipping some portion of the trail to go further north. And in our situation, it was flip-flopping due to fire.
Okay.
By the time we had crossed the California-Oregon border, the largest California wildfire of the 2022 season began the day, I think, let's see, it would have been the day before we got to Ashland in Oregon. We reached the border, and in that evening there was a lightning fire that began that I think ended up burning about 60,000 acres of land. But the smoke near the fire and into Ashland was so bad that a lot of people decided to flip-flop. So we skipped forward most of the state of Oregon to the last like 100 miles. Oregon is the fourth section and is roughly, it's about 490 miles.
Okay.
So yeah, we flip-flopped. This would have been sometime in July, I believe, or yeah, around July, late July. And yeah, so we ended up skipping all of Oregon, getting to, we began our Oregon section at Government Camp, which is a town. It's about an hour and 20 minutes slightly southeast of Portland, at the base of Mount Hood. It's a really nice area. From what I remember, all of Oregon is mostly just pine trees. What Oregon is known for is being the flattest section of the trail.
Okay.
While it does have similar elevation profile to some of the other sections, it definitely is the one that has, I believe, the least. And it's super flat. I mean, I think for me the easiest and the fastest hiking I did was definitely in Oregon.
And it's just forest.
Yeah, Oregon is pretty densely forest. Oregon is and Northern California are
pretty damp as well, right?
Yeah, it can get pretty wet. Luckily this year it didn't rain too much, so I didn't have any rain in Oregon or Washington or even in Northern California much.
Right.
But Oregon is a really special section, especially as you get closer to Washington because of all the volcanoes. And yeah, there's just the landscape changes once you get closer to some of these volcanoes, and it's I thought it was really quite beautiful.
Wow. What were some significant moments that you had in Washington in that section of the trail?
Yeah, so Section 5, Washington, is 505 miles just about. It begins at the border between Oregon and Washington, which is a river. Unfortunately, I'm forgetting the name of the river, but the town that you go through there is called Cascade Locks. Um, and yeah, so that section also actually a pretty nice mix of the whole trail. I would say it definitely has its sections where you are in the mountains, especially in the northern Cascades. It has a lot of beautiful dense forests, and then also a little bit of volcanoes, a lot of which you get to walk around, which is a really nice time.
Which volcanoes did you go visit?
Oh man, I think Adams is the first volcano. Although, man, at this time I'd have to look at the map because I really can't remember. Um, yeah, I can't really recall any from Washington.
But beautiful.
Yeah, definitely gorgeous. I hiked through Washington in two sections. The first hike that we did, in two carries, we did the first 320 miles. We hiked really fast. I think we did it in about, I want to say, 2.5 weeks roughly. And we were to where we ended off was at Stevens Pass, and then the last portion we did was actually where our hike ended because of the wildfire. We got back to Stevens Pass and couldn't hike any further because the fire was blowing across the trail at that section, and unfortunately stopped a lot of people from getting to the northern terminus at the Canadian border for the year of 2022.
Understood. Since you've come back, you were what does life look like now? Has it changed?
Well, yeah, through hiking is definitely a lifestyle. It's really fun, and if you're out there for a really long time, it does change your mind and the way that you live. And well, through hiking life is so simple. Mostly you're just concerned about where you're gonna get some water and making sure that you don't run out of food. So
But as far as your career goes, I remember what you were doing before, and I believe now you're coming back to a better gig than when you originally had decided to quit your job and do this.
well, yeah, sure.
Which I think speaks to the fact that people can go do this and it's not some huge liability to your work life, and that's, if that's a consideration that some people, or an excuse that some people would make to themselves, oh yeah, if I took this much time off of work, I don't know how blase blah.
Yeah, sure. I think that really beyond like what kind of working life you have before or after, more so is like, I've heard stories of people who had planned to hike for decades and then finally decided to do it. I think it just really comes down to making the decision that you want it more than anything else.
Hmm.